Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Compounding Podcast, where we talk to the very best people in their fields to uncover things we can all do to compound in all areas of life. Today, we're going to talk about the single most important area of life, which is your health. It's really the foundation of everything. And our guest today is Dr. Vass Elioupolos, or as I like to call him, just Vass.
Yep.
Welcome, Vass.
Thanks, Kevin.
Quick background, and then I'll ask you to add to this, but Vass is the co-founder of Rocky Mountain Regenerative Medicine here in Boulder, Colorado. Got his undergraduate education in neuroscience and MD from Cornell. He's an elite level jiu-jitsu athlete. He climbs, he whitewater kayaks, he has a family, just an all-around rad dude. And most importantly to me, for the past, 5 years, he's been my doctor and really my partner in health. So super excited to have this discussion. So welcome to the podcast.
Yeah. I mean, I'm truly honored to be here, Kevin.
Awesome.
So thank you.
Super excited. So just to get started, why don't you tell our listeners just a little bit more about your background and kind of how you ended up where you are today, your current practice?
Yeah. I mean, you covered a lot of sort of the bio points with med school. I guess medical education that's pertinent that I'd add is, I finished med school at Cornell and was hardcore into rock climbing at the time. And so I was looking for a place where I could train and get good training and climb. And so Denver has the preeminent or one of the preeminent emergency medicine programs in the country, which a lot of people don't know. But I came out here so I could train in general surgery and emergency medicine and rock climb at the same time.
Train in rock climbing.
That's how I ended up in Denver. And I guess more about my background. I mean, I was a Peace Corps volunteer between college and med school, which, I mean, maybe isn't super pertinent to this discussion, but was sort of a formative time for me. I'm not sure. I mean, you introduced me really well, so I don't know.
Well, I guess one thing that comes to mind immediately is, obviously, I'm a rock climber. And, I also, am passionate about my business. You were a rock climber. Now you do jujitsu. You're passionate about medicine. I mean, how did that, your passion for climbing at the time, and then also your experience in the Peace Corps, how did that sort of inform your medical school experience and maybe your early practice? Because you've ended up in a very different spot from most MDs. You practice a very different type of medicine.
Yeah. Great question. I think there's two things that come to mind when when we talk about like the Peace Corps. For me was, I was young, I was in my early 20s, and I really I was like, I wanted to travel, wanted to see the world, and I wanted to try to do something to give back a little bit. And so that's how I ended up there. And it was amazing to see where, I served in the Solomon Islands, which was not where I'd intended or wanted to go, but how sometimes things work out, for a reason. Yeah. And, being isolated on an, tiny little island in the middle of Pacific where I'd grown up outside of New York City. I mean, you could have like put me on Mars. Like that's how different it is from the lifestyle that we know. And just to see that, listen, there's another way to live. That's completely, I mean, their whole society, it just functions in a different way. And I'd grown up, going to where my father's family's from in a little village in Greece. So I'd spent time in sort of isolated areas, no electricity, no running water. It's not that kind of thing. It's the way the communities run they're highly interdependent, because when you live a subsistence lifestyle, if your garden fails or you don't have a good catch in fishing that day, your family goes hungry. And if you have a neighbor who has, in that society, it's their obligation to share with you. So the wealthiest people in that society are the people who share the most. And probably so it's lesson. A very interesting, I mean, you can see how it literally the most highly respected, the people who ascended to chief, to high levels in their society were the people who shared the most. And it was like, whoa, it's just very, very different from anything I'd experienced before. And so then to reflect on the rock climbing, I guess I'd seen that there's another way to do things, whether it's in life, how to structure society, language, and I was teaching in the Peace Corps. So, when you're trying to teach Western concepts of British school system to people who come from a totally different frame of mind, it's very hard. Some of the things that we take for granted just don't apply because their society, the way they think is different. And so trying to understand, okay, there's a different way to think about the world. There's a different way to live in the world and to do it successfully and be happy doing it. So that was sort of the Peace Corps. And then rock climbing, I guess I'm a bit of a risk taker.
Yeah.
It's, for me, I like living, and really, I maybe that's not the right term. For me, it's really the flow state that I'm able to achieve with those kinds of activities.
Yeah.
Puts me in a place where I'm happy. And it actually usually helps propel me either professionally or academically and personally. And so I found that, that combination of being willing to push myself to my limits physically and mentally, in ultimately what is sort of a search for that flow, pure focus, pure concentrate, whatever, however you define that, pure awareness.
Yep.
I think those are sort of the two things that translate into why I'm here professionally.
That makes a ton of, knowing a little bit about how you practice medicine and now hearing that background, I can see the very clear through line from your Peace Corps experience to, the outdoor sports. And, one thing that I preach a lot about is this idea of being multidimensional, like having, multiple completely different aspects to your life. And paradoxically, that makes you perform better in all areas of life.
It's symbiotic.
That's right. Symbiotic. Things that might seem to be in conflict with each other, it's actually the opposite.
Yeah.
And so I can definitely see that. That's probably why I was attracted to you.
Yeah.
As a doctor.
And I would say that, so I've, I don't know how much I've talked to you about this, but I've personally been on a journey sort of exploring that area of, and really this ties back to the practice in we're sort of live, look, perform better, longer. And that's sort of our, our tagline or marketing, whatever you want to call it. But that's what we live.
Right.
I want to live better. I want to look good while I'm doing it.
Yep.
And I want to perform at the highest level that I'm capable of performing at. And performance, most people think of as physical. And that's an crucial part of performance for me. But that also involves, it's cognitive performance.
Absolutely.
And so your cognitive performance is intricately tied. You cannot remove it from any other form of performance, happiness. And so I've personally sort of been on a journey exploring that and how, sort of whether it's my addiction to flow state or my propensity to sort of seek that state of mind and what that means and how, and I think that also sort of directly translates into, most doctors and most medical practices, if you have a brain issue, you go to the neurologist, and then it's not only the neurologist, but then there's the headache specialist, then there's the sub-headache specialist. And most medicine is trying to break humans down the way we break down a car or a machine or a robot. And there are things that can work that way with your health. Like, you can take out the appendix, take out a gallbladder. There's certain things in our human systems that function that way. However, the most important part of us is more than that.
It's all interconnected.
It's not definable. And to ignore that, which is in my opinion, now there are amazing things that we do in modern medicine, but modern medicine ignores that and more, in my opinion. And if you want true health, if you want true happiness, if you want true high performance, you need to incorporate all of those things, the definable, the measurable, and the non-measurable.
Well, we're going to dive into that here shortly and get into the meat of it. But I can tell you that that's very consistent with my own health journey. I had some health struggles in my early 20s when I was in college. And what I learned very quickly was mainstream medicine or modern medicine is great for acute illness and injury. You know, if you walk into an ER and your leg is bent 90 degrees,
we're great at that.
Incredible at fixing that, but equally bad at anything sort of chronic.
Or preventative.
Or proactive. And the list goes on. And I learned that over time. And the other thing is what that means for patients is, number one, you have to take responsibility for your own health. Nobody else is going to care about your health as much. Nobody else is responsible for your health. And two, you have to find doctors who are like-minded and forge a partnership. And that's what we're going to talk about. So let's start to dive in, because there's a ton to cover here.
Yeah.
But maybe we can start with, the name of your practice is Rocky Mountain Regenerative Medicine.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit, just as a starting point, what does regenerative medicine mean? Is it basically what you just described?
So what I think of as regenerative medicine is very different than what I think the industry would define regenerative medicine as. So regenerative medicine is a term that's used by a number of different clinics that function in a space where they're injecting biologics. And these are usually for, these are stem cell clinics, these are PRP clinics. These are clinics that are using some form of cellular or biologic therapy to heal injury. And we do that. I personally feel like we're the best in the world at it, is my personal opinion. But that is just the tip of the iceberg of what regenerative medicine is. Regenerative medicine, to me, and how we practice it in our practice, is a type of medicine that enhances your own natural biologic abilities to heal and function. So supporting those systems where they can be supported, and in instituting evidence-based therapies that can enhance those natural abilities to heal. So almost everything we do here, and I don't want to, we don't exclusively practice regenerative medicine because we're traditionally trained. We have that skill set. There is a place for pharmaceutical and surgical intervention. And I think the way medicine is practiced in this country, those tools are overused and relied on too heavily. And we ignore the innate natural ability for your body to heal itself. Your body is incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
It's the most powerful tool resource that you have. And with tricks of the trade that you can employ, you can enhance those natural healing mechanisms and sharpen them in a way so that you can achieve results that, even I didn't realize were possible before we started practicing this type of medicine.
Well, I think one thing that I think is a key word that you just mentioned is evidence-based. And the reason I highlight that is because some of this stuff starts to delve into what many people would classify as alternative medicine. That can mean a lot of different things.
100%.
And to a lot of people, that means like woo-woo medicine. And for me, I am all about results, all about science and facts. And one of the things that attracted me to you early on when I moved to Boulder was the fact that you're trained as a classical MD at one of the top medical schools. Your partner was as well.
Yeah.
But you came into this world by choice. And everything that you do, even though some of it would fall outside of what you would call mainstream medicine, or maybe most of it, is very much evidence-based. It's just a little or maybe a lot ahead of where the mainstream is. Is that a fair way to characterize it?
I mean, in my opinion, everything that we do here should and eventually will become standard of care practice, in my opinion. And what most people don't realize is that medicine as it's practiced today, and this is also evidence-based, that a new therapy, and let's take a simple example, a new drug. Let's take because this is specifically, well, there are other things that have been studied, but this is one that's specifically been studied. When you have a new blood pressure drug that's been proven to be better than everything else on the market, how long does it take for that drug to become the standard of care? The answer is it's somewhere between 17 and 25 years. From the time, and we're not even talking, FDA approved. We're talking from the time it is definitively
already
shown.
Proven.
It's proven. It's known to be better. you're talking about changing a behavior of writing, metoprolol for nifedipine on a prescription pad. That changing that behavior takes about 2 decades.
Right.
And let's face it. And now here's an important distinction. That's for therapy that's what I call in the pipeline, meaning patented. There's motivation to market that therapy because there's profit motive. You're going to get return on that marketing investment. That's lightning fast. 20 years is lightning fast in the medical industry today.
Right.
A therapy that is not in the pipeline. So this is another one that's been studied, cognitive behavioral therapy for depression. From the time that it was proven to be better than anything else, guess how long it took for it to become standard of care?
17 years.
70 years.
70.
70 years, a lifetime.
Right.
So therapies that are not in the pipeline, therapies that are not patentable, therapies that don't have a company that have a profit motive. And I'm not trying to demonize.
Right.
There's a role for those kinds of therapies,
Sure.
and we need that kind of investment to sort of push the margin. However, if there isn't that marketing investment to roll it out to physicians, it literally takes a lifetime for a new therapy to become standard of care. So take, for example, stem cell therapy in its current forms. It's non-patentable. They're yours, so when we do like cell therapy on me, we harvest my cells. They're my cells. They're not altered. For that to become a patentable product, you would have to alter that cell somehow.
Right.
So you splice a new gene into it, put a new protein on it. So you'd have to alter it in some way to make it non-naturally occurring for me. My cell therapy, my cells and therapy that I can use with it, even though it's a highly potent healing mechanism that can be used for many, many, many different problems and illnesses, it's crickets. Nobody's interested in it. And unfortunately, early adopters of these therapies sometimes fall into this category of woo-woo maybe the
mainstream establishment doesn't like it.
They look down on it.
Yep.
So stem cell therapy, in my opinion, it's the future of medicine. And I don't think it's in its final form. It will get better. But what's available right now is a fantastic, amazing tool therapy for healing, for cognitive repair and improvement, for stroke, and I need to be clear, in my opinion, this is all in my opinion, for any damaged tissue that you have, your natural healing mechanism to deal with that are what we call your stem cells. And stem cell is a little bit of a misnomer because they're mesenchymal stromal cells or medicinal secreting cells, but everybody calls it stem cell therapy. So that's what we call it. And what 5-6 years ago people said was quackery and witchcraft with PRP, which is sort of, it's not what I would call stem cell therapy. It's a different type of cellular therapy. But now the universities, now everybody's doing it. And so in my opinion, stem cell therapy will follow that same path. I don't know that it'll take 70 years. My hope is that it will be significantly less than that.
Yep.
But everything that we do, we evaluate, we look at the basic science, we read the papers. Koshal, who's not here with us today, is probably the smartest guy I know. And we look at this stuff together and we decide if it passes the sniff test. And so there are plenty of therapies that we have people ask for, ultraviolet blood irradiation, pulse DMF, and to name a few, hydrogen peroxide infusions. There's a long list of things that we've looked at. And I'm not saying that those therapies might not be effective or useful. Just the evidence that we want to see doesn't exist for those therapies. And so, that's sort of our measuring stick for do we implement something in the clinic or do we not?
Right. Wow. A ton to unpack there. And I think,
sorry.
I absolutely want to dive into the specifics, because I think that's what our listeners are interested in. So maybe a good kind of way to guide this is, let's talk about some of the different treatments or modalities that you use here, some of the top ones, and maybe help put it in context, because let's assume that our listeners don't know a whole lot about this stuff.
Yeah.
I have been on this journey for a while, so even though I'm familiar with all the things you're saying, I still know this much, very, very, very little. But maybe talk about like some of the reasons your patients might come to you, what types of patients, and then use that as context for the types of treatments. And I know you mentioned that you made a really bold claim about stem cells in particular, and talk about sort of how that might be utilized and what some of the evidence is and what some of the results you see, and maybe stem cells and two or three other things that you guys do.
Sure. And I would actually, if you don't mind, I would take a step back from that, and I would frame maybe a little bit of what we were talking about earlier, which is, traditional medicine is amazing. And the term I like to call, traditional, it's the medical industrial complex. That's what it is.
Right.
And I would encourage people to start thinking about their health insurance and most traditional providers and avenues as the same way you would think about your car insurance and the mechanic.
Right.
As a simple analogy, when you don't ask your auto insurer to like pay for your oil change or get the differential changed or transmission fluid. Your auto insurance is there when you get into an accident.
Catastrophic.
When there's when there's a wreck and it's a mess and it's a disaster. So that sort of analogy people are used to thinking. Your health insurance and the medical industrial complex, in my opinion, should be used in the same way. If you have, a stroke, you're septic, you've been shot, you've been hit by a car, run, don't walk.
Right.
But if you want to stay healthy and highly functioning for a long period of time, the last place you're going to achieve those goals is in the medical industrial complex. You have to take responsibility for that yourself.
Yep.
And unfortunately, that means, at least in this current system, you're going to have to pay for that yourself.
Yeah.
So that's just the way it is.
And I don't think that's a huge surprise to anybody to hear that mainstream medicine doesn't really focus at all on preventative medicine. I mean, maybe at a sort of token level, they do. And then the expense side of it is an interesting issue, because that's where, it does kind of create this divide between those who can afford the types of treatments people like you provide and those who can't.
Well, and I would argue that actually the type of medicine that we practice, because this, I guess, then from that rolls into sort of to answer the question you originally posed to me. But what I would say is that, this, addressing your health in this way is just not how we're trained in traditional medicine. We're trained to fix problems. And if you want to take a proactive approach and avoid problems, it's simply not taught anywhere.
Right.
So for us, we had to find that. We basically had to learn it ourselves.
Yep.
And really, I was my own first patient, because I saw in the hospitals that I was working at myself, and and you don't know this about me, but I have familial high cholesterol. So if I'm not medicated and being super careful with what I do, my cholesterol would run for, sometimes 500 total. And, early heart disease, dementia runs in my family. We absorb too much cholesterol. We don't produce too much cholesterol. That's counter to what I was told my whole life, seeing lipid specialists. And what I saw in the hospitals was I saw myself, I'd be like, well, so now I'm on a statin and they're telling me to take aspirin, but I'm not taking aspirin because I'm not doing that yet, and climbing, I don't want to, hit my head. It's going to be a bigger problem than it's going to help right now. And then, I could see, I'd see a patient and they'd be on, okay, aspirin, statin. Now they're on a blood pressure medicine, and maybe they're on Plavix. And I'm like, okay, that's me in about 5 years, and then you'd see that same sort of,
it's a death spiral
in
right?
7, and I'm like, and that's me in 7 years. And I got old enough where I was at the point where I was like, I don't want that.
Yeah.
I want something different. And all I'm getting is this formula,
right,
which lands you in the same spot. So what can I do differently? And that's really what birthed this sort of practice. And so to, I guess, get to the answer to your question is what therapies that we do. We do all kinds of therapies. We do a lot of preventative diagnostics, cancer diagnostics, cardiovascular diagnostics. I mean, really what a lot of people consider what they think they're getting at their concierge primary care provider, they're actually not getting. The AI-assisted diagnostics for cardiovascular disease, AI-assisted diagnostics for cancer, early cancer diagnosis, all of which are FDA approved, none of which is covered by insurance. We do all of that preventative diagnostics and the therapies that we feel we can implement, some of which are dietary, some of which are lifestyle, some of which are alternative medical therapies, some of which are traditional medical therapies, to help our clients achieve the goal of live, look, and perform better longer.
Yep.
And so I would argue that practicing medicine that way is actually highly cost effective. And to bridge back to the sort of the second question that led to this sort of, answer was, why do insurers not cover this? Like, it doesn't make any sense, because a little bit of prevention in your 20s, 30s, and 40s goes a very long way in your late 40s,
That's
50s,
the irony,
and 60s.
Is that insurance companies generally don't cover preventative therapies. But the irony, of course, is that would avoid 90%.
Well, but there's a reason for that.
Okay.
So most Americans are, if you look on average now, most Americans are with a plan for somewhere between 3 and 4 years.
So they won't see the benefit of it.
Most insurers are looking to conserve or cost save over a 3 to 4 year time window.
Right. It's not long enough to see the benefit.
They do not want to invest in a therapy that's going to reap dividends 10, 15, 20 years down the road. Now, it doesn't make sense, in my opinion, because we're all switching.
Right. The system as a whole would benefit.
The system is broken.
Yeah.
And so that's why I say I would encourage you to change the way you think about the system, because they're concerned about you for the next three to maybe 4 years, because then you're going to be on somebody else's books. And often it's going to be the Medicare books. So from a business standpoint, it doesn't make sense for them to, say, invest thousands of dollars in a cellular therapy that is highly likely, in my opinion, and from research that we've published, to save you the back surgery 2-3 years from now, or even 4-7 years from now, because that's somebody else's problem. So
let's dive in, because I think there's a lot. I mean, my observation, because I post on Twitter a lot about health related stuff, and there's a ton of interest in this stuff. I mean, I think people increasingly recognize that there is a different way, that mainstream medicine isn't meeting their needs, isn't helping them perform their best, well into the 40s, 50s, 60s, beyond. So I want to make it really tangible for people. So let's talk about some of your favorite therapies, like what you would use them for, how they work. You can start with stem cells or something else, because I think there's probably a lot of people out there who have heard of stems, like Kobe Bryant got stem cells on his knee in Germany or whatever.
Right.
And then what is that? And, so let's talk about maybe a couple of your favorite things.
Sure. I mean, I'll just rattle off a few, infusion therapies, and infusions run everything from IV vitamins, minerals, amino acids, simple molecules that you can get in a multivitamin, to things that are much more complicated and sophisticated, like NAD, phosphatidylcholine, chelation therapy, and ozone is an infusion therapy.
When you say infusion, you mean IV?
IV.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just, as you know, I have done a few of these, even probably what you would consider the simplest, which is a vitamin IV called a Myers cocktail. I've gotten huge benefit from it. Like it's one of those things that I'm an evangelist for, because there's zero downside to it. And it's proven for me to be incredibly effective when I'm feeling run down, just generally low energy, when I feel like I'm getting a head cold or have a head cold. I think it's probably effective for things like flu and even COVID.
I mean,
and that's like the simplest, most entry level type of infusion, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And then, so some of those infusions you rattled off, like what types of things, like what's an infusion and then what would it be used for? Like just kind of thing.
So I guess in simple terms, the vitamin infusions that you're talking about, we learn in medical school and even before in college, you get all the vitamins you need from our diet. None of us are malnourished. All the extra vitamins are just, wasted because your kidneys, you just urinate them out.
Right.
But that's not the whole truth. That there's a component, there's some truth in that statement. And when you take into account, anything you take in through the GI tract, well, there's limitations of absorption. So some people think they're getting their vitamin D or their other, folates and Bs, and they're not. There's anything you absorb through your GI tract goes through your liver. So that can be repurposed in many different ways. And so what you take in through your GI tract has absorption limitation, processing in the liver. And so what the rest of your cells are exposed to is a tiny fraction of what you took in orally. So if you're taking 10 grams of vitamin C orally, your somatic cells in your body and your organs might not really see the benefit of that, because all of that's been used up or wasted through absorption and liver processing. And so when you do it IV, you're giving your body kind of first crack at those nutrients and really just supporting your system with antioxidants, supporting your system with micronutrients that we know serve a function given the scenario. So like you mentioned, flus, colds, like, we put zinc kind of not as a standard, but in most of the infusions that you've had. Most Myers cocktails don't have zinc in it, but zinc, as everybody knows, particularly post-COVID, it can help block, viral binding to cell surface proteins. So there's different tools and different concentrations of these nutrients that you can use in different scenarios. And you just need a lot of that you can find on your own, or you need somebody like me who can help target that for you. So,
well, and the IV vitamin therapy is something, it's a good example of something that has sort of broken mainstream. I mean, you see these IV bars. Yeah. I preach about it all the time. And I've, turned several of my friends onto these IV vitamin treatments. And most of them were struggling to recover from COVID, and they were blown away with the difference that it made. But one thing I would say is, a lot of these IV vitamin bars that you walk into, now I understand them enough to like look at the dosages. Yep. And you simply don't get the ingredients or the dosages that you need to be effective.
It depends. Yeah. 100%. I didn't want to say, that, we do it better. But if you have somebody, and I think I'll go back to your point that, your health is your responsibility, and you need somebody who you trust, who geeks out on this stuff like me, who's reading these papers, who can help you sort through what's the chaff and what makes sense. So 100%, it's not every IV vitamin infusion is created equal.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things we're going to get into a little bit later is the doctor-patient relationship, which is a hot button for me. And I know probably for you as well. And I think that is super important, but suffice it to say for now that, I highly recommend that everyone find a doctor who is willing to be your partner, who you respect and is willing to be your partner. And I often say that, you would never take financial advice from someone who was always broke. So why would you take medical advice from someone who doesn't represent what you want to be, who it doesn't geek out on it, who doesn't share your values, who doesn't have similar, athletic and performance goals and so on. And that's maybe different for everybody, but I think that's super important. But I want to keep going down this because I mentioned, we talked a little bit about IV vitamins, and
infusions.
I think that's probably like the entry level.
Oh yeah. 100%.
Talk about 2 or 3 other infusions.
So,
like what would be like maybe NAD and what is that used for? And then I know like there's some stuff that's great for like depression, addiction, and so on.
Yeah.
Which
perfect.
is, huge. It's something that like so many people struggle with.
Yep. I love it. So NAD, a lot of people are starting to become familiar with it. NAD is sort of the new anti-aging molecule. It used to be resveratrol or plant flavonoids. Were considered sort of the anti-aging molecules par excellence. Now it's NAD. NAD is a ubiquitous cofactor. You need it for, not all, but many of the different biochemical processes that your cells need to do to function every day. And so it has kind of come into the spotlight in the mainstream press because in its function as a cofactor and a supportive molecule, it activates telomerase. And telomerase is an enzyme that helps to elongate your telomeres. Telomeres are the caps at the end of your chromosomes. That's one. It's not the only biologic clock, but it's one of the ways we measure biologic age. So anything that makes your telomeres longer is generally considered to be making you biologically younger. So it's gotten press because many people consider it to be sort of the modern day fountain of youth. Right. However, it serves many other purposes than that. NAD is essential to many, many different processes. And NAD can be used to help enhance your biochemical, all of those biochemical processes, which can be involved in your health in many, many different ways. So for example, addiction. NAD is used, we help people get off of substances that they're addicted to, that they don't want to be on any longer. That could be opiates, that can be alcohol. There are many other things that you can use NAD for. Not because, in my opinion, NAD is a direct therapy for addiction, but many addictions are actually a self-medication for something that you are in some way deficient in or inefficient at doing. And when NAD supports all your biological processes so you can do that better, there's something about using NAD in the withdrawal period that enables people to come off of addictive substances much more rapidly and without the withdrawal that they often, without the degree of withdrawal that they would sometimes experience without.
Well, you mentioned a really important point. Sorry to interrupt, but you mentioned like a lot of these therapies are not necessarily silver bullet therapies for anything, but they're the rising tide, right? They 100%. Rise the tide of your health, which if you're cognitively healthier, if you're physically healthier, then a lot of other things sort of magically resolve. Right?
But this is what I talked about in the beginning, is that you cannot extricate the mechanics and the biochemistry from, the rest of the biologic processes in your body. Like you can't separate your kidney from your liver, from your endocrine system, from your circulatory system, from your nervous system. Although medicine, you have a brain person, you have a lung person, you have a heart person, you have a kidney person. One of my pet peeves is we have to stop compartmentalizing our health.
Well, what's fun? A great example of this is I don't really suffer from depression in a meaningful way, but millions and millions of people do. And it's a great example of trying to address a peace part, right? So as I understand it, a lot of the depression meds, they have some sort of direct action on serotonin, and maybe it provides some benefit. But one thing I've noticed, and I've heard a lot of stories about this, is like you take a therapy like NAD or some of the others that you can mention, or even just the simple IV vitamins, I feel my mood lift immediately when I have a Myers cocktail.
If you're biologically functioning better.
That's right. So a lot of it is foundational and inflammation and foundational health. It's that rising tide, and all of a sudden depression, which was really probably a symptom of something else.
Absolutely.
Magically disappears. And you avoid what I call the pancake stacking, which is what you described earlier. Is like, first I'm on this antidepressant, and then I'm on this, and then I'm on this.
And then I'm on that.
The USA Today the other day had this stat that blew my mind, that 50% of Americans are on 4 or more prescribed medications. And that just blew my mind, because that's a path to nowhere.
I mean, the tragedy there is that most of those people don't need any of those medications.
Yeah.
And in fact, in the long term, in my opinion, most of those people would probably do better without those medications. It's not that those medications don't serve a role in the right scenario. It's just that we've become dependent on them as a crutch in a way that is unhealthy, in my opinion. And so to speak directly to your cognitive function depression, another infusion therapy that we do is ketamine. Now, ketamine is sedative. We use it in the hospitals for, acutely painful procedures. Somebody comes in, their femur sticking out of their leg, and you need to put it in traction, bridge them to get them to the OR where it can really be washed out and rotted properly. You whack them down with ketamine, you get them you power wash the dirt off the bone, you put it under traction, and then, the orthopedic surgeon can take them up and deal with them and get them fixed up permanently. However, ketamine is a highly effective medication that produces rapid antidepressant effects, anti-anxiolytics, so meaning anti-anxiety effects. And in my opinion, it's the only real proven medical therapy for PTSD. The traditional medical setting, including the VA, they're recalcitrant. They will not. And this is all those things that I just said are proven, evidence-based. You cannot refute that. There is no other medication that does what ketamine does. Now, it's used in a different fashion than the way we use it as a sedative in the hospital. It's at lower doses. The infusions are slower. And people are just resistant to it because it can also be used as a party drug.
Because it's a mild psychedelic, right? Is it?
It is a psychedelic.
Okay.
It is a psychedelic.
Yeah.
And what I think is super important here is, one, we have an effective therapy that is being denied to people who really deserve this therapy. Now, the great thing about ketamine, in my opinion, you go into your primary care doctor, you go into your medical contact person, you're feeling a little depressed. They say, try getting out in the sun, do a little exercise. People come back, a few weeks later. And then the next thing you know, they're on a prescription for an SSRI or an atypical antipsychotic. And that's just, if you want to talk about quackery,
right?
In my opinion,
that's the irony.
Nobody should do that.
Isn't that the irony, though?
What's that?
That mainstream medicine would point the finger and say that some of these therapies are 100%. Quackery, and you would say it's quackery. Yeah.
History is not going to be kind to us. When we in med school, we look back at history and we say, when we knew that, when it was proven that infections were related to microorganisms, and cleaning the surgical instruments and washing your hands before treating patients, that was considered silly and folly. And, it was the best surgeon was the one who had the dirtiest, bloodiest apron, like a butcher. Literally, this is true. This is fact. I feel we're going to look back on how we practice medicine now and feel the same way we feel about the people who are practicing that way. We're going to feel about that same way about how we're practicing now.
Well, the evidence is all around us, right? Americans are not getting, well, I guess you could extend it even beyond Americans, but certainly Americans are not getting healthier. They're getting less healthy. And so something's not working.
And so, I guess 100% something's not working. You have to take responsibility for your health. You can't rely on the medical industrial complex to do that for you. You can rely on the medical industrial complex when your leg's fallen off.
Right.
We do that great, as you said. Now, the other thing that's amazing about ketamine is, and the psychedelics in general as a class of medication, because, now, with 122 passed here, psilocybin, it will not all be, I don't know if that's in effect this year. I don't know exactly when it comes into effect, but psilocybin will be legal for possession, self-possession. You won't be able to sell it. But in Colorado, at the way marijuana is sold or the way liquor is sold, but you'll be able to access starting 2025, 2026, the regulatory the state's been tasked, that bill tasked the state with regulating the medical use of medicinal plants, namely psilocybin, but then others to follow. And a lot of people look at that and think this is crazy, but what they don't understand is the reason, and I'm going to bring this back to ketamine, the reason why ketamine works in anxiety, depression, and PTSD is that it boosts your body's production of BDNF. BDNF is shortened, an acronym for brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Brain-derived neurotrophic factor. This is a protein that's critical for healthy brain and central nervous system functioning. It's highly important for synaptogenesis, so creating new connections between nerves. You need BDNF for robust neurosynaptic generation. Ketamine exerts its effects by boosting BDNF production, which enhances neuronal plasticity. So another way to describe that is, what is intelligence? Like, what was different between Einstein and the rest of us? He had more synaptic connections. That's it. Intelligence is synaptogenesis. So we have a medication that's legal, that's FDA approved, that exerts its effect on depression, anxiety, and PTSD by boosting BDNF availability and production in the central nervous system.
Right.
So that's step one. I would argue ketamine should be the standard of care first go-to for most people with depression, anxiety.
Right.
Why? Because it's not chronically prescribed. You give it in the office, which takes abuse potential close to zero. It's a very safe infusion to be done in low doses, which is how it's effective for those conditions. And people don't need to be on it for the rest of their lives. They usually need 3, 4, 5 ketamine infusions. They might need a top up at a year or 2 or 3 years, depending. But many people you treat for those conditions with a series of therapies and they're gone. Why? Because you've helped enhance their neuronal plasticity and their brain learns their way out of whatever that mental, quote unquote, mental illness.
Right.
To the point where they don't need the therapy anymore.
Well, I think the thing is, I would advise anyone who struggles with this type of thing you owe it to yourself to at least investigate it, because isn't like the first law of medicine, do no harm, right? And these are therapies that generally have almost no risk, almost no downside, and a lot of potential for upside. And I would say in the case of depression, I didn't really mean to turn this into a discussion on depression, but I've never met a single person on antidepressants who would say they're cured. But you do
I can
hear
give you a list of clients.
That's right. Well, and even you talked about psilocybin.
Okay. If you want to talk to some of them, I'll ask them.
But, yeah, I mean, well, even psilocybin, there's a Johns Hopkins study. I think it was funded by Tim Ferriss, the podcaster, and they've had miraculous results at Johns Hopkins.
So the reason why I bring this up, and I brought it back to ketamine, but a lot of the cognitive decline, the dementias, the brain fragility that occurs with aging comes from the decreased production and availability of BDNF. Okay, so think about that for a second. We have an aging population. We have a dementia crisis that's about to tidal wave this country. If you ask any, health
that
administrator,
include like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's.
No, dementia is really a term just for like senility.
Okay, just
it's
general
the
cognitive decline.
And there's different types of dementias, like Alzheimer's is, but there's many, Lewy body. There's all there's all sorts of different dementias. This is going to be a health crisis because one, there's no treatment for these. And what I'm saying is there's already an FDA approved medication that boosts the availability and production of the protein that's required to avert those conditions. Now, there's no studies that look at that question specifically. So I'm not saying if you're worried about dementia, go run out and use ketamine. What I'm saying is that ketamine and the other entheogens like psilocybin, DMT, LSD have all been shown to boost and enhance BDNF production.
Right.
These medications are tools that need to be used judiciously.
Sure.
With, in my opinion, with professionals who understand what they're doing with them.
Same as any psychiatric
their
drug,
utility,
right?
Same with any psychiatric drug, but their utility, in my opinion, goes far beyond, anxiety, depression, and PTSD. Right. So think about, psilocybin. Now, psilocybin it exerts the same effects. It boosts BDNF production through a different receptor pathway. Why is that important? So ketamine doesn't work for everybody. And we know that that's been studied, that's evidence-based. But the people who ketamine doesn't work for, guess why? It's because for some reason it doesn't stimulate increased BDNF production in those people.
Mm.
The study hasn't been done, at least that I'm aware of, to look at, well, if you use psilocybin instead of ketamine, if you use a different receptor, so you're using a different road to try to achieve the same result, can you get the same sort of effects with psilocybin, LSD? I mean, the whole class of entheogens. But I guess the reason why I'm bringing this up is these therapies can be used in a variety of different ways, microdoses, larger doses, for cognitive enhancement.
Mm-hmm.
If you have, and silicon, this is probably not news to many people who are listening.
Microdosing and stuff.
Well, not just the possibility of microdosing, but if you have a business issue, a business problem, if an academic issue, a problem that you're having trouble finding a solution to, things that enhance BDNF help people find solutions to those issues, and it unlocks neural pathways that it appears you generally wouldn't be able to access because of your default mode network functioning. And now I know we're getting kind of deep in the weeds, but
if that sounds deep in the weeds, people use Adderall for that, right? Which is not a sustainable or healthy.
Yeah, and so it brings up another point. One way to look at and think of medications and or any tool, like even caffeine, right? Caffeine can be a performance enhancer. And any performance enhancer, when used too much, it loses its efficacy. And in fact, not only can it lose its efficacy, it can become actually a chronic drag on the system. So, everything has to be used in an intelligent fashion for a purpose,
right?
In my opinion. And so that, bringing this back to the original question, which is therapies, so IV infusion therapies. Ketamine is an IV infusion therapy that I think is, just totally underutilized.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, we kind of went off on a tangent.
No, this is great. That's like, because there's, I want to pivot then to some of the other therapies. But I do want to say, what brought me to conclude many of these same things was, I mentioned earlier briefly that in my early 20s, I went suddenly from being a super athletic, I would say vibrant young man, to essentially bedridden. And when I look back on it now, I think it was probably some sort of viral, related illness that wrecked my health. And it took years to recover. And that's what led me to start looking at, mainstream medicine had nothing
no
answers.
To offer you.
And nothing. And I tried a few things. Thank goodness I avoided a few treatments that would have done a lot of harm.
Potentially.
But then I started turning toward these more foundational things. And I will tell you, and this is mostly mentioning just for our listeners, that the epiphany for me was that at some point I realized, not only can I regain my health, I can become way healthier than I was before. I was not on a great path even before I got sick.
Yeah.
But and that's kind of been the way I've lived my life ever since. And I'll say, now I'm in my 50s and I'm performing as physically, cognitively, in every way as well as I ever have. And I know you're the same way.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the real payoff here. It's not just that you can, if you struggle with depression, it's not just that you can alleviate your depression. It's that you're going to become perform better in every way and increase your longevity. And 100%. So that is the goal, right?
And and so just to kind of talk about your specific scenario, like, listen, we all have different predispositions to certain conditions, and meaning that I might be predisposed to heart disease because of my familial cholesterol history, and you might have been predisposed to some autoimmune or immune dysfunction relative to a viral trigger.
Mm-hmm.
But no matter what the disease process, if you enhance your body's underlying ability to heal, whatever it is will be less severe and you will handle better.
Absolutely.
And so all of these therapies, whether we're talking infusion therapies or shockwave therapy or ozone or, cellular therapy or, hormones or peptides or, and the list goes on and on. All of those things, if used in a way to enhance your own natural intrinsic healing ability, will help your body deal with whatever it's dealing with better.
That's right. The benefit, like a simple example for me that I think anybody can relate to is before I used to have chronic problems with my sinuses and I would pick up every little cold and flu virus that came along. And now I hardly ever get sick.
Right.
When flu season comes and goes, I rarely get sick. And it's just because, it's about that rising tide.
Well, it's the work you've done
to
invest in your health. And, I guess I'd be careful. I guess I want to say, be careful about thinking about these therapies as only sort of supportive therapies, because ozone in particular, stem cell therapy in particular, shockwave therapy, peptide therapy can all be cures for a variety of different problems or issues in and of themselves. And, I'll mention stem cells again, because you mentioned them. Stem cells, the way they're used in most clinics around the world is very targeted, short-sighted, and narrow, meaning that you can go get stem cells for knee or shoulder, orthopedic issue, almost anywhere in the world now. And there's a general acceptance among people who are open to these type of therapies that they can be an effective treatment for ligament tears, cartilage tears, wear and tear breakdown of joints, acute injuries of ligaments and poorly vascularized tissues. And they are, and they can be. And that's the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
They can be used for many, many different things, because really all your stem cells are your natural intrinsic healing ability.
Right.
And if you aren't now, and what I would say, what's different about how we do stem cell therapy than really, I think, anyone else in the world is we have a lot of people come in like, my back hurts, I partially tore my ACL. Can we fix that with stem cells? Yeah, you can. And if you're metabolically not healthy, your natural healing ability is compromised. And so if you're willing to put in a little bit of work to sort of fix or address those underlying issues, guess what? Your stem cells are going to function better to heal your problem. Right. So why wouldn't you sometimes, for most people who are listening to your podcast, we're not talking about, now we have some people walk in our door who need a year or two of work to get their health back on track, lose 30, 40, 50 pounds. There's a variety, get off 5 or 6 different meds that they don't really need that they could get off. And so in those people, those small, paying attention to the diet, paying attention to exercise, paying attention to sleep. I have a feeling most of the people on your podcast are probably already doing all those things.
Yep.
So the work for the people who are already doing that foundational work is usually minimal, if anything. Like for you, there'd be no work. You've already done the work. You're already functioning optimally. But to understand that what to expect out of a stem cell is based on the underlying health of the individual. And so if your underlying health is better, your stem cell will work better.
Right. It's like either a virtuous cycle or a vicious cycle, right?
Yep.
Because the healthier you are, the more benefit you'll get from therapies like stem cells. The more compromised your health is, the less benefit you'll get. And so all these things sort of work together. It's all synergistic. Let's go into stem cells a little bit, because we've mentioned it a few times. And I've never done any stem cell treatment. My wife has when she tore her, you did stem cells on my wife when she tore her meniscus. I know you've done them personally with injury. So talk a little bit about like some of the uses that you see for just like acute conditions and injury. But then as you alluded to, the like beyond, that's the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
What's the next frontier?
Well, and I'll even take a step back, stem cell therapy, I should say, is frankly, it's the wrong name. It's what everybody calls it. And so that's what we all call it, because if we called it stromal cell therapy, nobody would know what we're talking about. But your stem cells work in a way that is not. So most people think about stem cell. You have some cell that could turn into multiple types of cells. So,
Right.
so that's sort of the definition that we all sort of understand as a stem cell. And so, unfortunately, this sort of paradigm got put out there and has been repeated that, if you have damaged cartilage, you harvest stem cells, you put stem cells in the joint where there's damaged cartilage, they'll turn into the cartilage. And that's how people think how stem cells work. That's not how stem cells work.
Yep.
They have the capability to turn into another cell, but that's not actually how they heal tissue. They heal tissue very differently. They heal tissue by enhancing the damaged tissue's ability to divide. We heal injury through cell division from local cells. And so this is why stem cell really is the wrong term, because it leads everybody sort of down the wrong path. So for example, stem cell therapy in COVID, everybody's like, that doesn't make any sense. What are you doing replacing damaged lung tissue? It's like, no, actually the studies that looked at this that showed that, stem cell therapy could be a potential option in severe, cytokine cascade associated from COVID or related to COVID is because of stem cells find dysfunctional cells and bring them back into a homeostatic, healthy functioning state. So what is cytokine storm? COVID triggers this immune reaction where these immune cells go haywire. Stem cells find the haywire T cells and calms them down. And actually it'll pull them offline if they're unsalvageable, or it will heal them to the point where it gets them functioning more normally. So stem cells find damaged cells, unsalvageable cells, they'll remove them, take them out of the equation. The cells that are healthy, it will enhance their ability to do what they do. And so in the example of cartilage, it will enhance their ability to divide to replace the torn cartilage. So first, stem cell therapy is the wrong term, but that's the term everybody uses. There are many different types of stem cell therapy: bone marrow, fat, allogenic, cultured. I mean, and exosomes I'd put in this list, even though exosomes really aren't. There's no cell in exosomes, but stem cell therapy actually is talking about a whole range of therapy. It's a little bit like saying surgery.
Right.
It's like there's lots of different surgeries.
Lots of ways you can use it.
There's lots of different stem cells. There's lots of different ways that can be used. My recommendation about that is go to somebody who has experience with more than one form of cell therapy, because, some things bone marrow cell therapy is great for, some things adipose is better for, some things an allogenic therapy is better for. And most people who do most stem cell therapy clinics, they learn and do one thing.
Right.
And that's it. And so they're not well versed in, the full range of options that you could have for your issue.
Right.
So you want to find somebody who has experience with variety of different types of cell therapies. And maybe I'm getting off topic.
Well, no. Actually, if I can pause there for a second.
But this then informs like, okay, we get people calling the clinic all the time. It's like, well, I want stem cell therapy. How much does it cost? And it's like, well, that's literally like calling the hospital saying, I need surgery. How much does it cost? It's like, well, I can't answer. We can't answer that question.
Yep.
So anyway.
I was going to say, I think what's happening now is patients are starting to ask for therapies. Like they've heard stories from their friends or they've read about it or whatever. I had a friend that got a stem cell treatment from his orthopedic surgeon, and his orthopedic is a good example of what you talked about, where this orthopedic surgeon had been trained on one specific use of stem cells, which is you shoot it into the knee or whatever. Yeah. And I got that sense that this guy wasn't really a stem cell expert. He picked up this one modality of stem cells. And, I think, maybe that works, but
it can work that, so cell therapy is incredibly powerful. And so a lot of people can get results even when it's misapplied.
Right.
In my opinion.
Yeah.
But, but this is where what those people who go to those, like I would say the vast majority of stem cell clinics are one-trick ponies.
Right. And
you're not going to get, in my opinion, the most effective therapy from somebody who is just a one-trick pony. And again, the orthopedist, I wouldn't replace your ACL. That's not what I do. Mm-hmm. But If you want cell therapy, come talk to me because I'm your guy.
Right.
I can tell, and I'll tell you, like, man, should you go to Panama or Colombia or Europe or where, if there's some other thing that's better,
Yep.
like I'll tell you, or
Right.
at least present it to you as an option. And a lot of people hear that and they're like, well, I'm not going to Colombia.
Right.
So even though maybe, but I'd rather whatever, stay and do it. We have clients all over Brussels,
Yep.
France, Kenya, South Africa. I mean, we have Australia, many of whom fly to us here because of what we do and how we do it. And some of whom it's like, no, you don't actually need to come to me for that. You could go to, I can look at the clinic. I see what they're doing. That will work fine for you where you're at. Try that before you fly all the way to us. So there's a lot of different, ways to look at stem cell therapy.
And before we move on from stem cells, just give like a couple quick examples of patients, maybe one that's like a straightforward use of stem cells and one that's more exotic.
100%.
Yeah. Just
so straightforward use of stem cells. Well, we just published, so I don't know if you know, so we just published our spine series 550, it's the largest spine series, the largest study ever published on stem cell use in spinal disorders. So 550 patients, low back pain, single harvest their stem cells, inject into their discs, facets, ligaments, whatever we believe the source of the pain is, follow them for 2 years, compare it to standard of care therapies, including, steroids and fusion. And stem cells, not in my opinion, but you can pull the paper, we can link it. It performs better than all the standard of care therapies. Longer pain relief. Nobody went on to require fusion or microdiscectomy surgery in any way, shape, or form. No serious adverse events. Nothing's risk-free, but our the most common things were pain and bleeding, and then infection, which is anytime you put a needle through the skin.
Sure.
But our infection rates are significantly lower than standard of care infection rates.
Right.
So we beat them on pretty much every metric you could look at. The only one where you can't is if you directly compare cost, stem cell therapy injection into the spine versus steroid injection into the spine. Steroids are way cheaper.
Right.
But what they leave out of their equation is that 50% of the people, now this is MIC data, 50% of people who get a steroid injection in their spine go on to require surgery.
Right.
They don't include that surgery cost in the calculation of comparing steroid injection.
It's just single
stem
treatment
cell
cost.
They're like, well, yeah, are stem cells more expensive than steroids? Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And
if half the people who need a steroid go on to surgery, stem cells are a way cheaper option.
Right.
If you factor in that additional cost.
Okay.
Because so straightforward.
So lower back pain,
ligament injuries, cartilage tears.
Yep.
This is what, stem cells are sort of known and
bread
talked
and butter
about
stuff.
for.
Yeah.
What else can they be used for? They can use to be heal any tissue.
Because I know, just to sort of cue you up, I always thought it was interesting that you do, I think with most of your patients, you'll do like IV, which, most people think of stem cells as like you shoot it into a joint.
Well, and so I'll get great. Yeah.
Okay.
So how do I use stem cells? I rock climbed for many years.
Yeah.
Before I rock climbed, I ran cross country, high school, college. I wrestled high school, college. I still like wrestle. I coach my son's wrestling team. I wrestle and do jujitsu, almost daily.
Too much, probably
too much. And it's hard on your joints. And, so I do, so I banked my stem cells. My partners harvested my stem cells. They're in the cell bank. And once a year, and actually I've been doing it so regularly that this year I haven't had to do my knees. My knees aren't bad, but it got to a point where if I ran 3 miles, 2-3 times a week, my knees would start swelling up. They'd be a little achy. And I was like, yeah, I should probably stop running that much. Dude, you can use stem cells as a maintenance tool to maintain the health of your joints. So, I do stem cells once a year, once every other year in my knees. I can train all I want.
Well, and I want to go a little bit deeper into that whole banking idea, because you did a extraction with my wife, and she has her stem cells banked.
Yep.
I want to do it. I'm generally like very averse to needles, and I know that it's like a liposuction that you use to
It's
get
a
it
mini
out.
liposuction. Or we could do bone marrow. I mean, we can bank many, there's different types of cells we can bank.
But I'll tell you, I've been pretty lucky, I think, in that, I'm 52 and I've generally felt pretty good without taking that sort of measure. But I literally just reached a point, like in the past few months, where I'm starting to feel like a little bit creaky. And that really excites me. The thought that I could go back to feeling like loose
in my opinion, so everybody should have their cells banked.
Yeah.
Everybody. Why? Because you can use them. Now we're talking about them as an injury healing tool. But again, so what else do stem cells do? And so I'll go out on a limb here and say, none of this is FDA approved. And we can get into that. If people want to hear about it, we can talk about that. And if it's not FDA approved, how you do it. Anyway, that's another topic. But stem cell therapy, we talked about NAD being a telomerase activator. Mm-hmm. Guess what's a more potent therapy for turning back your biological clock? Your stem cells.
Right.
You heal your own. You're literally. What does healing your tissue mean? You're turning back the clock on your tissues for a period of time.
Yep.
But the most effective anti-aging treatment, in my opinion, are your own stem cells.
Yeah.
And you can activate those stem cells through dietary intervention and fasting. You can activate those stem cells through therapies like NAD and peptide therapies. Mm-hmm. And you can directly access your own fountain of youth by harvesting, banking, culture expanding, and reusing your own stem cells.
And, a lot of these biohacking guys that a lot of my listeners probably are familiar with, it's like Dave Asprey, Ben Greenfield, a bunch of these other guys, mm-hmm. They have this aspiration to live to be 180 mm-hmm. years old. And this is the way they do it. I mean, I know I've seen on some, Ben Greenfield is one that comes to mind, who's done these full body stem cell treatments, all the joints, everything. Well,
you don't even have to do that. That's the beauty, so shockwave therapy is another therapy. It's FDA approved for injury. And it has other FDA approved indications, but you can target stem cells to an area by stimulating that area with shockwave and then administering those cells IV. And so this is why every professional athlete doesn't have their stem cells banked. I have no idea.
Yeah.
They should, because you'll have a longer career, and not only will you have a longer career, you'll be more comfortable while you're doing it. And if you are in a sport where, like football, where there are issues like CTE and brain injury, well, guess what? There's a whole host of tools, including IV stem cells, that could be used to help enhance the health of your central nervous system. Now, that's not an FDA approved.
Yep.
Some people would argue with me, I'm speculating. In my experience and in my personal opinion, mm-hmm. it's a no-brainer to bank and use your own stem cells. And what I would say is, in the future, what is the future? When you're born, instead of throwing the placenta and the umbilical cord in the garbage, which is what we now do, you bank it. And now you have your own young, healthy stem cells that could be cultured and used for the rest of your life, as long as the power to the liquid nitrogen doesn't run out on the canister that it's in, right? So that's one of the potential future applications. These therapies are in their infancy.
That's right.
So as good as they are now, in 10 years, they'll be better than they are now.
And that's always the case. I'll tell you a quick side story is one of my best friends played in the NFL for 10 years. I used to climb with him a lot. And he said, back in his day, you were just a tough guy. You dealt with the injuries, you got the surgeries. And he said, dude, these days, the game has changed. All these top players, or all players, if you're making millions of dollars a year, they have a whole team that they've built, and they're doing all these therapies. They're doing all these things, and they're really prolonging their life. They're coming out of the NFL and their bodies aren't destroyed anymore. He's like, dude, I wish all this stuff existed back. And that'll always be the case. Every 10 years, it'll probably, but to your point, if you wait for the medical establishment to catch up, you never get there.
You might be waiting 50, 60,
Yeah.
70 years.
And, you know, athletes more than anybody have a huge need to stay on the cutting edge.
And I would argue for your listenership, you know, like I rely on my practice to support my family. Yes, I'm an athlete and you know, thrill seeker, whatever, traveler. Yes. And, I can't tell you how many people, you know, personally and clients that I've had where you enhance their health, you enhance their cognition. Imagine having the energy and the cognitive sharpness in your 60s that you had in your 20s and 30s.
Yeah.
Imagine how much more you could do with all of that experience and knowledge and know-how. You know, 3 more years, 5 more years professionally, if that's what you want to do. And if you want to just hang out on the beach and not have to worry about your back aching. Like, you know, I don't understand why people.
You owe it to yourself to explore it.
I don't understand why people outsource their health.
Exactly.
To a system that is not invested in their long-term health.
Well, listen, we could go therapy by therapy.
No.
I can, as much as you geek out on this stuff, I'm geeking right there with you. And we may very well do another episode and go into more of these, but I want to sort of kind of land the plane a little bit by asking you a broad question, but you can be really specific, which is, let's look at like 2 categories of people. And I'm going to mostly focus on males because I think that's most of my listenership and I think probably most of your patients. But let's take one category being someone like Johnny, our producer, he's in his, you know, mid to upper 20s, wants to start thinking ahead, but maybe doesn't have a ton of money to spend on this stuff. And then that's one category. The other category would be guys over 40, people like me who are looking at middle age and beyond and maybe have more money and more urgency to spend on this stuff and to take action. What are like some ways to get started, some things that each category should be thinking about and some places to get started, some of the top therapies that would come to mind for you?
Yeah. So, you know, I would say 40 and under, meaning, you know, 20s, 30s.
Yeah.
This is where we're failing as a country and as a system because small interventions will pay huge dividends. And if there's one thing that you're in that age category and you're otherwise healthy that you should be doing, you should be fasting a couple times a year.
I was hoping this would come up because I know you're a huge advocate. So go a little deeper into fasting. And
so fasting, historically, well, what is fasting? It's you're inducing a starvation state. And the reality is our bodies, however we got here, designed, evolved, however we got here, we are actually supposed to be going through a starvation period periodically. If it's not annually, every other year. There are genes that you activate when you're starving that are protective, that enhance your health. And the only time you activate them is when you're starving. Now, we live in a culture where we don't ever have to activate those genes. We're blessed, right? We're super lucky. We don't ever have to starve, most of us. And therefore, we're not activating those protective genes. Activate those protective genes. Every culture, every society knew this. Like every major religion has fasting. Like intrinsically, it knew that it was important in some way. And we now have the evidence to show that, yes, it's important because you're triggering protective genes that help prevent disease and keep you healthier longer. And the animal studies that look at this show that if you just implement fasting, you know, in a species that doesn't live very long, so in mice, where you can do these studies over relatively short periods of time, if you take one group of mice and just feed them normally and watch them through their whole life, and you take one group of mice and you fast them once in their life, they'll live 25% longer.
Wow.
25%
just
longer.
From one fast.
Yes. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But it's not just the protective genes that you activate when you're starving. the reason why we hijack this mechanism is because when you're starving, you consume yourself for calories. Part of what's important about that is when we have plenty of calories, our body is designed to conserve everything. We save everything. Why? Because our body knows the starvation's coming and it wants to be ready. It doesn't know that we're not starving.
It's part of the evolutionary blueprint.
Yes.
It's like how we were like,
absolutely.
It happened over time.
Yeah. And so, but the problem with that is you build up cells over time that sort of lie in senescence that are, they're not even the B or the C players. They're the D or the F players on a cellular level. Mm-hmm. So you have, the way I describe it is you have cells that are highly functioning. They're firing on all cylinders. They're efficient. Their processes work well. They're good at what they're doing. And then you have cells that are a little bit older. They still all the way down to, the cell that's kind of like your crazy cousin who you don't know how they get through the day, but they're still making it.
Right.
You have cells like that in your body. Guess where disease tends to sprout from? It sprouts from these cells that the term we use is, senescent cells that are sort of wacky. They're not diseased, but they're a little wacky. Guess where cancer,
right,
autoimmunity, plaque formation, heavy metal, buildup, chronic inflammation tends to come from that. But now it could come from anywhere, right? You could have cancer transformation from an A player, but it's highly unlikely. Usually, at least the current body of knowledge, disease tends to come from this body of cells.
Got it.
When you starve, your body's smart. It doesn't eat the A players. It consumes the junk.
Right.
That's what it's saving it for. So every time you fast,
that's what they call autophagy.
Autophagy.
Yeah. Okay.
That's autophagy. Is you're literally consuming the cellular junk and cleaning house, spring cleaning, and often this is why people hate fasting. The first time it sucks. You're going to detox.
Right.
But that pays health dividends down the road. The thing that's super important about this is anytime you trigger autophagy, once you get calories again, your body knows it has to rebuild. And so what it does is it will stimulate a short-term but profound boost in the stem cell numbers available.
Right.
Because it will use that boosted stem cell number to replenish the cells that were consumed during the fast. But guess what? When you get new cells from stem cells, you're not replacing them with junk. You're getting rid of the junk and replacing it with A players. So you're physiologically moving yourself up a notch every time you complete a cycle of starvation and refeeding. So we use this procedurally. So again, it's like if you're going to do stem cell procedure, why not harvest when you're boosted?
So my wife, before she had her stem cells harvested, she fasted for 3 days or something.
Yeah.
And then you refeed, that causes a spike in stem cells. So you're harvesting super high quality, dense stem cells.
Higher numbers. Yeah.
In higher numbers.
Yeah.
Makes a ton of sense. So before we move on from fasting, and by the way, if it's not obvious, the other great benefit of fasting is it's pretty low cost.
And so that's why I say, for most 20 and 30-year-olds, if you just fasted once or twice a year, and when I say fast, there's fasting mimicking diet. So you could Google search fasting mimicking diet protocol. This is Walter Longo. He's a PhD who's done a lot of this most of this foundational research. And he's got a protocol. It's in his book, The Longevity Diet.
Yep.
I'm a big proponent of that book. There's a lot of misinformation about diet out there.
Yep.
No diet is right for any one person. And if you want an evidence-based approach to your diet without doing any sort of diagnostics, because listen, we can do genetic testing, we can do micronutrient, we can do the type of testing to tailor a diet for any one person.
Yep.
Though that testing exists, it can be done. It's relatively easy to do, but it costs some money. And so, you can tailor a diet using data. You can tailor a diet using an evidence-based approach. And I would encourage you to look at Longo's book. Okay.
The Longevity Diet by Walter Longo. Okay. So fasting, and then what are a couple other quick hits for the under 40 crowd? And then let's move into the older guys.
Yeah. So under 40, if you don't have a specific medical issue, fasting And then you're looking at how to, I guess, in my opinion, generally like the clients that we have in those age groups tend to be high performers,
like athletes
and high performers professionally. You want to reduce recovery time. So in that group, there's, peptides are an option, ozone's an option. They cost some money, but they're not that you're not talking that you're talking hundreds, not thousands of dollars. Those and some of the basic infusion therapies.
Right.
It's always better to have somebody who can help you guide like where that money's most efficiently spent. Like, do I spend $200 at the IV infusion center down the road, or is it worth actually saving that and maybe doing, something else, doing a 6-month stack of a variety of peptides for my specific issue, or so those would be, infusions, ozone, peptides, and then cellular therapies for injuries, if and when that.
And we'll bookmark things like peptides and ozone for a future episode, because we could spend
a weekend talking about any one of these things.
Awesome. All right. So now let's talk about the over 40 crowd who are probably starting to notice like some nagging injuries, maybe like a little bit of brain, like they're starting to have some issues. They still want to perform their best. They maybe have more urgency and more money to spend. What are you looking at then?
I mean, what I would encourage you to look at is to spend some time and energy on some of the preventative diagnostics. So for example, AI assisted DNA screening for cancer. And with the FDA approval, it's the companies that do that, whose tests we use to do that, they'll say 50 and over, right? So I'm not saying every 40-year-old needs, DNA based, free DNA, blood-based cancer screening. But if you have a family history, why wait till you're 50?
Right.
In the right scenario. So that's one example. The cardiovascular screening that looks for plaque buildup, particularly in the coronary arteries.
And that's AI based as well.
That's also AI based. And so, and really all you're using, you get a CAT scan,
right,
and then you load that into a proprietary system that basically they're just running it through their AI system and spitting out the plaque images that we just physically don't have the resolution to see on current CAT scanning imagery, but the computer can see it,
right,
and can show it to you. So, this we could also spend like a day talking about so 40 and over, get an appropriate workup. The lab workup that you're getting at your primary care doctor is totally insufficient.
Right.
Completely, utterly, I don't want to say a waste of time, but largely a waste of time. Go to somebody who can do a full screening panel on you, who knows how to interpret it, who knows how to give you options on what to do with that. And that's sort of the baseline. Then layer on these other additional preventative diagnostics, depending on your specific scenario. And then on top of that, layer on a plan that's tailored for you,
right,
to help enhance your body's healing ability to keep you healthy and highly functioning. Because if you do that in your 40s and early 50s, in my opinion, you can eliminate a lot of the major problems that people hit when they start hitting their 50s and 60s. So what I would say is, we know, like we currently, without any enhancement or anything else, and just appropriate, and not even medical intervention, but appropriate lifestyle intervention from the Blue Zone research, living to 110, even into, your 120s, is a reality.
Right.
You should be able to live at least to 100, highly functional and happy, not in pain. That's what they do in the Blue Zones. So why can't everybody do that? The reality is everybody can do that. Now, in my opinion, you start layering some of the advanced diagnostics and therapies to head off at the past your specific problem areas,
right,
in so much as we can identify them. I mean, that's just icing on the cake.
Yeah. I mean, I can, what I tell people often is, when you get to be, let's say, your mid 40s or maybe 50, you've got a decision to make. You will either accept a slow decline in performance or you'll do something about it. And, I'm 52 and I just sent my hardest rock climb ever a couple weeks ago or a few weeks ago. And I'm not ready to stop quite yet. I want to keep going. And you have to invest more and more. And I always say, turn the screws tighter if you want to continue to perform at your absolute best, into your 50s, 60s, who knows how long it can go.
And I, applaud you because 100%, man.
Yeah.
Like, why wouldn't you?
Yeah. And a lot of this stuff, this is maybe a good segue into kind of the last area I wanted to explore, which is the doctor-patient relationship, which is a trigger of mine, because I can't stand even participating in the mainstream medical system because of the way it's structured. So let's go there, because what I was going to say is a lot of this stuff, listeners are probably thinking, well, gosh, that all sounds great, but I don't have $200,000. It's not, we're not talking about that. Yeah. It's actually, a lot of this stuff is quite affordable. So let's go into that whole arena of talk to me about the doctor-patient relationship, and maybe just through the lens of how you guys work with patients. Because one of the things I like is we're just more like partners. In fact, I often wonder why you don't push harder on stuff, because you're often hey, here's what I'm seeing. Here's what you're telling me. Here's your options. But you leave it up to me and we decide together what to do. I love that.
Yeah. Right? To an extent, there will be times when I personally don't feel like I've ever had to push you.
Yeah, that's probably true.
There are people who I do push, but not in the way that most people would think. So for example, I had a conversation this morning with someone who he's stuck in a narrative about his life, professionally, his health, that is just, in my opinion, it's BS. And it's a story he's telling himself, and it's keeping him stuck. And, I said, man, listen, you're coming to me to try to help you solve these problems. And I want to help you solve them. And frankly, there's different avenues we could take, but the biggest issue I see is you're putting a roadblock in your own way. You've got a narrative that is, and I'm not I don't know everything, but this is what I'm seeing. And I really think you should, and I encouraged him to, consider a path.
Right.
But that's what I did. I encouraged him to consider a path because even though I might think that's the right thing for him, actually the only person who really knows what's right for him is him.
Right.
And if so this gets back to the and more thing that I think we started on, which is in medicine, we love traditional medicine where it's trained, the medical industrial complex. We love to feel like we're in control. We love to feel like we know. We love to feel like we're evidence-based and data-driven. And we are all that and more than that. And you cannot ignore the more than that. And so the discussion that I have with most of my clients when they first come in is if a sheet of paper where everything there is to know about a human and how it functions and its health, how much do we know and how much can we quantify with our current diagnostics? Is it 90% of that, 50% of that, 25% of that? Everybody's a little bit different. Most doctors function we know, what we can quantify is maybe 90%. Now, if you ask them, if you press them, they'll say, oh no, I think it's maybe a pixel.
Yeah. I was going to say 1%.
On that page, it's a dot. That's, and so it doesn't mean that, it's futile or that you don't use data, but the way medicine is practiced traditionally, it functions as if we can quantify 100% of what being a human is and what health is. And so this is a common scenario. I've been, diagnosed with, I shouldn't say common scenario, but a scenario we come across. I've been diagnosed with X condition. And they said, either you have no options, when you were young. Oh, you had mono, or you had you got EBV and you're destroyed. Well, there's nothing wrong with you. All the labs are normal,
right,
and we have nothing to offer you. And the person's like, well, I'm definitely not normal, right? There's something wrong with me, and I have no options. It's futile, right? That's one way to go.
Yep.
Another way to go is the way you went, is like, well, I'm not ready to accept that narrative. And that doesn't mean you create pie in the sky. Now, having a positive mental attitude is a good thing. But the reason why I'm talking about this is you need, in my opinion, a partner in health who's willing to evaluate the evidence, do that in a judicious fashion, and be able to be open to the unknown and the unquantifiable in a way that optimizes you.
Yep.
Period.
I think that's a super important point that I've actually never heard a doctor make on any of the many podcasts I've listened to, which is the unknown is always greater than the known when it comes to health. And you can act like that's not the case, or you can embrace that and do the best you can. But you have to have a business model or a healthcare model that facilitates it. So, you're not meeting for 15 minutes with your patients, right?
Well, so what I would say is that the traditional approach to medicine, or the medical industrial complex approach to medicine, in my opinion, it's going to work itself out of a job. Why? Because already computers are better at functioning that way,
at the
data-driven way, only data-driven. Well, the evidence says this, therefore, like, you have to do that.
Right.
You have a stent, therefore you need to be on Plavix for 6 months. Well, do you need to?
Right.
Do you absolutely need to? If you're climbing 5, 12, 13, like you, and maybe like you do you need to be on a blood thinner? Really?
Yeah.
Is that the safest thing for you? They're not. You need, so
it's too formulaic.
A computer can do that better than physicians. Like, I would argue that physicians have worked themselves into a place where they're not physicians, they're technicians.
Mm.
And the system supports that by actually reimbursing the quantifiable better than it can reimburse the non-quantifiable.
Right.
Which is why nobody has a conversation with their doctor anymore, because you spend an hour, you have to bill in 15-minute increments.
Right.
And it's like, you should be able to do a history and physical in 15 to 20 minutes, right? That's what the industry expects. But I would say, if you're meeting for less than an hour, the first time you're meeting your healthcare provider, you're not even scratching the surface.
Right.
And so, anyway, I don't know if that went off on a tangent, but it's,
because I ultimately wanted to drive down to the way that you guys practice here, which I think is cool, is you basically have like, I think it's like a membership model. So, and it's not as expensive. I mean, I'm a member, so it's not as expensive as you might think, but you basically, that baseline gets you like a regular meeting with you, or, the physician, all of your kind of in-depth baseline sort of diagnostics.
Yeah.
Right. And then a plan that, that you can customize based on how much money you want to spend, how much urgency you feel, and so on. Is that,
well, actually, yeah. Well, and so I don't know if I've ever told you this, but, I've come to you. I know you have experience in marketing, and that's what we're great at is medicine. What we're not good at is promoting ourselves.
Right.
And we have a lot of colleagues, a lot of whom I know we've lectured at conferences who are like great at promoting themselves. And I personally believe like we provide such, anyway, a lot of them are great people, and they're awesome at what they do, and we're better, and we're not good at that. So I've come to you for that advice. And a long time ago, you told me, if I were you, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, I'd line out what, the treatments. And so our membership model is loosely based on that. So our lowest membership model is designed for people in that 20, 30, early 40 range, who really, they don't really need much.
Yep.
They just need sort of an eye over their shoulder to be like the basic diagnostics to make sure there aren't any, zebras or, out buildings burning that they're unaware of, and a plan to make sure that they stay healthy, like $200 a month. Like, I personally feel like 2 visits a year, screening, an appropriate screening lab work. I mean, most people can.
It's a no. Well, I didn't want to mention the price because I didn't know if you want to make it public.
Well, yeah, but the baseline anyway, that's our.
Well, let's talk about it because I was actually really pleasantly surprised. So your baseline tier, $200 a month for a younger guy like Johnny. You get to meet with a guy like Vass for a couple times a year and go in depth. You get the diagnostics, all the lab tests are covered. Like, what a great way to. I mean, that's like some of the high end gyms cost that much every month.
Well, that's what I personally. It's a ridiculous bargain.
Yeah, it is. That was, and I wasn't going to say it.
And so, I mean, but the reality is, so then, so that's what that was designed for.
Right. And
it's
then
like, it's a kind of a hands-off, like you need a little guidance. You want to be able to afford the diagnostics, but who can really spend $2,000 on labs?
Yeah.
Well, it's like, well, you spread it out over the year.
Right.
You make it affordable.
Right.
And then people can benefit from that. And then, you go up, so the next level is sort of more appropriate for somebody like you. Although actually you haven't even really needed that yet, but it's more visits, it's more diagnostics. It's more sort of hands-on,
right? Because
the reality is like, what good are the diagnostics if you don't have an action plan for
it? And let me clue the listeners into what that looks like. The best feature of all to me is at that second tier, you can text Vass or your healthcare provider. Like that's the kind of relationship it is. And I am the biggest abuser of all of that because you made the mistake long ago of giving me your cell phone number. And so I text you regularly and you're like, man, this guy.
Well, but so here's what I'd say is all of my clients are people who I genuinely like. I can, and this, is it, what's ethical? Not like I consider you a friend in
right.
many
Yeah.
ways,
We
right?
hang out.
All of my clients are people who I respect, who I learn from, who push me to be better, who I would be happy inviting to a barbecue, in the backyard of my house. And I feel like vice versa, even though time restraint, like often that doesn't happen, just but I feel like, listen, part of the reason why I left medicine, yes, I was looking for a better way, but that system it's killing people. It's killing the providers. Go ask your doctor. Do they like it? They hate it. It's slowly sucking them dry.
Sure.
And Koshal, my partner, and I made a resolution for ourselves that if we're going to foster an environment of health, we want to be in a place that we love being in with people who we love and respect. And
that's as good as it gets.
What's come of it. I mean, we're, I would say we're still early in our practice, but you've seen, we started in a basement.
Yeah.
And I mean, we're on the launching pad. And so I would say like, we haven't even really gotten rolling yet.
Yeah. And for the listeners or people watching on YouTube, especially, we're sitting in your new office space, which is under construction. It's literally right on Pearl Street in Boulder. It's a really cool space. And I think it's just, we talked about the other day how the vibe is important, right? Like you want to come into a place that feels healthy, that has good energy, because that's what it's all about. And kudos to you for, your enthusiasm comes through when you speak. I can just tell you light up when you speak about this stuff. And isn't that what you want out of your partner? Like if you're going to come to someone for financial advice, don't you want someone who's just a complete geek about finance? And same thing with medicine. Like you want your doctor to be really excited and to practice what they preach and so on.
And I would say, I want to hear from you when something's not right. I genuinely want to know.
Yeah.
The last thing I want is somebody to not be like, well, I didn't want to bug you, but so and such, and we extend, so like family members,
Yeah.
It's like if your daughter, were to have an issue,
Yep.
like, I don't know if I've ever explicitly said this to
Yeah.
you, but like, like, dude, I'm here.
In some ways it's like,
I'd rather know, because
yeah,
a lot of the time, like, oh, hey, no, don't waste your time in urgent care. Let me call in, whatever.
yeah,
Let's, and it's not just me being altruistic. Like that's that's business for me.
well, and in some ways it's like going back to the way medicine used to be.
100%.
That was what, like, your family doctor was that for you.
It was somebody
they
who
knew you,
and 100%. And the pendulum has swung, in my opinion. It started even. This is another thing, maybe too deep in the weeds, but medicine started, and I even had some of my best mentors in med school and residency practiced pre-antibiotics. I mean, think about that.
Right.
That was not that long ago. We're talking 1940s,
sure.
Even into the 50s, right? So into the 1950s, medicine was largely a hand-holding supportive role. Doctor, like the primary care physician, was a mentor, a sage, sort of wizened mind who could help you navigate things. But the medical therapies that they instituted were marginally effective. And we've compensated for that by swinging the pendulum too far the other way, in terms of now we can do all kinds of amazing things, but that's all we do. Because if it's not that, then it's just quackery. But the reality is, in my opinion, the pendulum should be somewhere more in the middle.
Best of both worlds.
Best of both worlds. And that's why our practice is designed the way it is.
That's awesome, dude. Well, I think that's a good note to wrap up on. I'm just going to kind of close with a couple of questions. The first one is, I'm sure a lot of our listeners will be thinking, yes, this is a path I want to go down. I mean, how can people contact you? Like, do you guys offer services like beyond? I think you serve people all over the place.
We have clients. I mean, so here's what I'd say is that it's definitely better to be able to get. I mean, it's different. It's like you said, it's different. You can record on Zoom or whatever.
Yeah.
It's not the same. And it's the same in medicine. Like we do have long-term or long distance relationships with clients. We literally, I have clients all over the world. Mm-hmm. It's better if at least at some point they can check in. It's not essential, but I prefer it because there's something different about being together. And so we help people remotely. We have long-term clients who are remote. And if there's somebody you can find locally, sometimes we can help people do that. But I'll tell you, I've looked even in communities where you would expect there to be a practice like this. Yeah.
It's impossible.
It doesn't exist.
I can tell you it's really hard. I mean, I talk to people all the time about this, and it's just so hard to find this type of thing. So, and by the way, Boulder isn't the worst place to visit if you want to come.
True.
But so where can people reach you? I mean, what's your website?
Yeah. So rmrm.com.
rmrm.com.
Rocky Mountain Regenerative Medicine.com. I mean, my email is VEMD@rmrm.com for Vass Elioupolos, medical doctor at rmrm.com. Feel free to shoot me an email.
Awesome. This is amazing.
Contact us on the website.
Last question that I ask to everyone is, what's one thing you're looking forward to? It can be personal, professional, anything. It could be as small as like, I'm picking up my daughter from school today.
No, I'll tell you, so what I have a lot of things I look forward to. I look forward to wrestling practice with my son.
Nice.
I look forward to Tuesdays, a day where none of us have after school activities. So we'll all, my wife, son and daughter will all get to spend, we'll do dinner together rather than like, running in and out. And related to the business, we are, after we complete this move, which, next 10 days or so we're going to be, I think I've talked to you about it. We like, our goal is not just to change, how medicine is practiced locally within, our sphere of influence, but we really, Kaushal and I really feel like, we have a potential solution for the problems in the healthcare system right now. And it's a problem that everybody says like, oh, it's too big. No, it's not too big. It's not unsolvable. It's very simple. We just have to choose to solve the problem. And our solution is to go after the doctors.
Educate doctors.
And so that's our next step. And so, people are asking for these therapies, and it's largely falling on deaf ears. But we're hoping to take advantage of the discontentment that the providers have with the system to try to nudge the needle, move that pendulum back this way. So that's what I'm really looking forward to.
Wow, that's an awesome mission. Well, dude, this has been amazing, even better than I expected.
Oh, thank you.
And we've only scratched the surface. That's
I
the
know.
crazy part.
Well,
thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. I really
right.
appreciate it.